Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. For those who don't know me, I am Shelley Plant. I'm the Nature Tourism Manager at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and I also chair the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. As most of you probably know, we're really lucky here in Texas that over the years we continue to really have a strong hunting and fishing tradition with just over 1 million hunters and over 2 million anglers. Our traditional user base continues to remain fairly stable while other states have seen some dramatic declines. In addition to our traditional outdoorsmen, we've had a growing population of wildlife viewers with close to 4.5 million viewers here in Texas, half of which are bird watchers. So as this number of viewers continues to rise, it's become increasingly important for us to better understand this group if we want to stay relevant moving forward. If you've been in the national conversations lately, the talk of relevancy has become a huge issue for us. How do we stay relevant going forward with a changing demographic? So as part of Texas Parks and Wildlife's nature tourism programs over the past 25 years, I've really wanted to more fully investigate and learn about wildlife viewers, what their relationships are with our agencies, how they like to receive communication from us, how we can better interact with them, and how they like to support conservation, both through their own actions as well as even possibly monetarily some days. So this and other questions are what we were able to investigate in the survey that we're going to share today. So in 2021, our Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group won a multi-state conservation grant, and we were able to work with Virginia Tech in the DARE lab to produce a report that came out in August of this year. And that was a survey called the Regional and National Wildlife Viewer Survey, Enhancing Relevancy and Engaging Support for a Broader Constituency. As part of that project, Virginia Tech offered the opportunity to just over a dozen different states to do an oversample in their own states and pay to get a state-specific report. Many thanks to Clayton Wolf and Michelle Diaz for helping to make this possible in Texas and let us take part in this very unique opportunity that hadn't happened before. So we've enjoyed working with Virginia Tech and the team there on this project. The data gathered and the results and recommendations you will learn about today are definitely fulfilling a data gap that we've had at state agencies and other organizations. Hopefully our partners in the nonprofit, municipal, and federal sectors will also find this information very useful going forward. We look forward to sharing what we've learned. Thanks again for joining us as we share the results of the Texas Wildlife Viewer Survey. We hope this presentation helps spark some new ideas on how we can all better engage with wildlife viewers, how we can meet their needs while also meeting our organization's goals, and then improve engagement with and relevancy to this important growing audience. With that, I'd like to turn things back over to my colleagues at Virginia Tech. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks so much for the welcome and for the explanation of the broader context of this project, Shelley. It's great to be presenting to you all at Texas Parks and Wildlife, and then I also know some partner organizations are joining us here today too, so thank you as well for being here. We want to acknowledge our sponsors for this work, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies as a key partner, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program, and then also Texas Park and Wildlife. So thanks to all of you for making this possible, and especially thanks to Shelley for not only being the state rep from your state representing this project, but she also was the lead for all of the states in the national and regional project and the PI on the grant that we got for this work. So Shelley's been a huge leader in making this happen as well. So thanks, Shelley. It's been great to work with you. So to the rest of you all, welcome and thank you for being here. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. We're going to talk for about an hour and then we'll have plenty of time for conversation. We anticipate being done early. I want to make sure that as we go through the presentation, you feel comfortable and welcome to put any comments or questions that you have in the chat pod. We probably won't have an opportunity to answer them while we're presenting, but since we'll have plenty of time at the end, it's great to have them there and ready to go. Additionally, I really encourage you to think about throughout this presentation, how is this relevant to your position? How is this relevant to your job, your division, or the broader work of your agency or organization? Because we did this with the hope that this work will really be applied. So we hope that you can think about ways that that's possible to happen as you go forward. So today we're going to be talking about this report. It was released recently. It's available online, open access for you to download, to share with others. You can see a QR code here for it that you can scan on your phone, or Emily will be putting it into a link into the chat pod as well. Today, we are not going to be able to cover everything in there. This is a very long report, although there is an executive summary at the beginning that summarizes all of the key points. But it's there for you to dig in on anything that you find today that's interesting. We'll be showing some of the things that we think are highlights, that Shelley thinks are highlights. And if you want to see more details, understand more about what we found, or look even deeper into other responses that we aren't able to show here today, it's available for you. So before I go any further, I want to acknowledge and point out my co-authors on this report. Christy Petoskey is the lead author on the state report for Texas. And Christy's a PhD student. She'll introduce herself as she's co-presenting with me, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her background and interest in this work. Emily Sincular is also here with us today for the first hour of the presentation. She has also been heavily involved as a graduate student on this project. She has been the lead author on some of the other state reports and was the lead author on our national and regional report. So the three of us have worked closely together on this project, in addition to a bunch of other state agency colleagues and Virginia Tech colleagues. So it's really been a group effort throughout the project. So as Shelley shared with you, there's a few things that we hope to accomplish with today's presentation. One is we're highlighting the key findings from the survey and helping provide a profile of wildlife viewers in Texas. And we're hoping that that will serve a few purposes. One, in the Texas State Agency, as well as partners who work in the state, thinking about how you can support wildlife viewers and their interests more. Two, thinking about how you can broaden the relevance of what your agency does and the programming available beyond those that are wildlife viewers who hunt and fish. We know many folks who are involved in hunting and angling also like to view wildlife. But what about the people who don't have those connection points as readily to your agency? Who are those other viewers, and how could you have a stronger connection to them? And then finally, thinking about how to develop financial support opportunities specific to wildlife viewers so that there are opportunities for them to have more of an investment in the work of the agency. So let's give you a little bit of a background on the survey and why we engaged in this work, carrying on from what Shelley has already started in this conversation. First, we want to make sure everyone's on the same page by what we mean when we say wildlife viewers. We use a definition that was adapted from the National Survey of Wildlife-Related Recreation, I should say hunting, fishing, and wildlife-related recreation. And we wanted to make sure that we use something similar, since many state agencies have been following this definition as they've characterized wildlife viewers in their state for many, many years. So we are interested in wildlife viewers who are intentionally observing, feeding, or photographing wildlife, visiting parks or natural areas, again, to observe, feed, or photograph wildlife, or maintaining plantings in natural areas for the benefit of wildlife. So the focus is on people who are doing this for their primary purpose, not someone who just happens to see a squirrel as they're walking down the street, and they aren't intending to focus in on viewing of that wildlife. So as Shelley mentioned, there's a variety of ways of looking at the trends in wildlife viewing, either across your state or across the country. In Texas, the latest estimates in 2016 from the National Survey were that 5.9 million Texans, adult Texans, I should say, view wildlife. Nationally, the trends from that same time period showed this trajectory that you can see on the graph, with growing numbers of wildlife viewers. in the country. And in fact, 14.3 million wildlife viewers were estimated to be added, or more people involved and interested, from 2011 to 2016. And it's about a third of the population in the US that's interested in wildlife viewing. So very large proportion, and certainly the largest proportion of any type of wildlife related recreation. A lot of that interest in wildlife viewing comes from around the home wildlife viewing. You're going to see that we found the same thing in our survey as well. Similarly, or I guess I should say concurrently, hunting rates have declined or remained stable depending on where you are in the country during that same period. So a lot of state agencies have expressed an interest in how can they reach out to this population of folks who have growing interest in wildlife through wildlife viewing, and ensure that they continue to have a really broad constituency of supporters in their state. So when we started our project at the national level, we asked the state agency reps who were involved, there were about 20 of them, why they wanted to be part of this survey effort. And of course, this idea of the growing number of viewers and their potential influence, we heard over and over again, but we also heard some other reasons. One is that a lot of the state agencies said it's really hard for us to reach out to wildlife viewers. While we have an angling database or a hunting license database where we can easily find people to reach out to via mail or via email, we don't have the same sort of mechanism for viewers. Maybe we have a newsletter, but that's just getting a few of the wildlife viewers that are out there. Also, there was a lot of interest in getting more information on viewers' thoughts, preferences, and behaviors. While the national survey has been great for understanding what number of people are viewers, how far they go away from their home for viewing, how much they spend on viewing, it hasn't dug in as much related to their attitudes or their skills or their relationship and thoughts about the agency. And that's really important because a lot of the state agencies were saying they're really interested in how can they better serve and communicate with viewers and other underserved groups that might be interested in viewing. They realize that that's not a group that they've had as much connection with, and they aren't quite sure what to do if they want to do more in that arena. And then finally, thinking about how to connect viewers to mechanisms to contribute financially. There's straightforward mechanisms like licenses that are already set up, and there's institutionalized process for people to give money to a state agency through the purchase of a license or the requirement for them to do so. But there's not in many states as obvious a way that a wildlife viewer can support the work of the state agency. So all of those reasons, and probably others that you all might be able to think of, encourage viewers to get, or encourage states to get involved in understanding viewers. If you're interested in any of the background to wildlife viewing that is out there, I encourage you to check out this literature review that was our first product from the project. The lead being Emily and Kelsey, another graduate student on this project, went through all of the recent studies that have been conducted on wildlife viewing and summarize them in a really easy to use way under headings that are very easily accessible, like who are viewers, what's important to viewers. And so I encourage you to check this out. It's a easy to digest document. It's meant to be a resource for people in agencies who don't have time to read all the literature or look for it themselves. And then I finally wanted to point out that there's the national and regional survey that Shelley mentioned. And we have a report from that as well. So if you're interested in how your state agency's results or your state's results compare to other places, we have national results as well as regional results in here. Additionally, if you're from a partner organization that works in other locations as well, this is a great place for you to look. And you'll notice there, you see Shelley's name listed as one of the co-authors on this as well. So thank you, Shelley, for all of your contributions to this. She led the effort to have state-related case studies in this report. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Christy, who's going to talk more about the survey methods.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Patatsky, and I'm a PhD student in the Dayer Lab. And I've been working on this wildlife viewing survey since about February or January, but I'm slowly transitioning, although continuing to work on this project. My PhD is on bird feeding. So basically still wildlife viewing. So wildlife viewing in general is basically my area of expertise now. So I'm going to get into our survey methodology and then try to start to take us through some of our initial insights before passing it back to Ashley to go into the really key recommendations that we found in our data. So the survey in Texas was administered fully online through Qualtrics, which is a survey panel. And so this online company brings together people who have previously said that they would be willing to participate in online surveys. And with the successful completion of the wildlife viewing survey, they were then given a small financial compensation. So the survey ran from October to December 2021. And as you can see on this map, we had 15 states that we oversampled in, and we reached our goal of 1,012, but 1,000 being the goal, respondents from Texas. And the survey consisted of 117 survey questions, which actually only took about 15 minutes to complete, but covered a range of topics. And these included, the first question being the consent question. The second question was then our CERT screening question, which read, in which, if any, of the following forms of wildlife viewing have you participated in the past 5 years? And then we listed 7 forms of wildlife viewing, including feeding wild birds, maintaining plantings in natural areas for the benefit of wildlife, feeding other wildlife besides birds, and closely observing wildlife or photographing wildlife. And if a respondent indicated that they had not participated in any of those 7 forms of wildlife viewing in the past 5 years, they were then removed from the survey. And I think it's really important to stop and emphasize that the results of this survey only show the preferences and behaviors of people who do participate in wildlife viewing and not those who don't participate in wildlife viewing. And so to give a sort of overview of some of the survey questions that we looked at, with 117 questions, we covered a lot, but it included wildlife viewers' demographic characteristics, their viewing behavior and interests, duration, location, and frequency of participation, participation in other outdoor recreation, including hunting and fishing, but also activities like hiking, swimming, and camping, their level of specialization, which covered a range of measures, their viewing-related expenditures, barriers and social support in their participation in wildlife viewing, their likelihood of participating in conservation behaviors. And in addition to that, we also covered their familiarity with, perceptions of, and trust in TPWD, as well as their experience with TPWD programs and services and past financial contributions to TPWD. And so all of those questions were then specifically tailored for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. So things that were not available currently from Texas were not shown in the survey. But for likelihood to support TPWD financially and through conservation behaviors in the future, that was then a broader list of things, some of which were not currently offered. And finally, we also looked at their preferred forms of viewing support from the agency and their preferred forms of communications. So we implemented a number of measures to ensure the maximum quality of our survey data, and these included attention checks and a minimum completion time. So attention checks were sort of a set of 5 statements throughout the survey, which were worded in a way that they were opposites of each other. So for example, one question would say, how strongly do you agree with the statement, wildlife viewing is an important part of my life? Or to what extent do you agree with the statement, wildlife viewing is not a central part of my life? And if a person indicated that they strongly agreed with both of those statements, it sort of flagged to us that they were either speeding through the survey or they weren't reading very closely. And if someone stumbled through 2 of those attention checks, they were then removed from our data set. And also we had a minimum completion time to remove those people who were just speeding through and clicking to get that financial compensation. And that was the minimum completion time was based on the pilot survey that we ran of 115 people. And into our data analysis, we used descriptive statistics for statewide results, and we also used chi-squared tests and t-tests to explore differences among consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers. And I'll get more into what that means, but I also want to first emphasize that the data set for Texas is now openly available for further analysis, and we'll provide that link now. And the data set comes with a number of things that will help you look into the data. So if you see something today or you're reading the report and you're thinking, oh, we didn't look at that, I'd be interested in seeing the nitty gritty on these pieces of data, you have everything we have. So In addition to the data set as a CSV file for those who use R, Excel to analyze data, and as an SAV file for those who use SPSS, which is what we use to analyze our data, which is the statistical package for social science. We also include a PDF of the survey instrument, so you can see our exact wording. And as well, there's an Excel file that explains all of the variable names and what each of the values mean in that variable. So I think Emily's just sent out that data set. And with that, I'll get back into our consumptive and non-consumptive viewer analysis, which really form the bulk beyond our statewide results. So non-consumptive viewers, we define those as those who have not hunted or fished in the past 5 years. And that came from our outdoor recreation question. And consumptive viewers are those who had reported that they had hunted or fished in the past 5 years. So I think as we start to look at the graphs, it's important to note that we have striping across the black bars that represent our statewide results. And there's no bars across consumptive and non-consumptive, because there was a slight difference in our sample size for those who didn't answer the question on other outdoor recreation for one reason or another, but it's a very, very small difference. So in Texas, we had 49% non-consumptive wildlife viewers, those who don't hunt or fish, and 51% were consumptive viewers and those who did hunt or fish in the past 5 years. And that is quite a bit higher than our national results, in which 46% of viewers were consumptive viewers. So getting back into the nitty-gritty of those consumptive viewers, 30% of all wildlife viewers in Texas only fish and view wildlife. 4% only hunt and view wildlife, and 17% fish, hunt, and view wildlife. So I think it's important to note that really the majority of these viewers fish and not hunt. In addition to those attention checks and minimum completion time that I mentioned earlier, another measure that we use to ensure maximum data quality were demographic quotas. So we used the results of the 2016 National Survey of Wildlife Recreation that Ashley mentioned earlier to define a representative sample of wildlife viewers and what that would look like based on age, gender, and education. And we used these so that we knew that we were getting a representative sample of wildlife viewers in Texas. And these numbers were based on national numbers. And we did achieve those quotas in Texas, with our mean age being 48. For gender, 51% of wildlife viewers were men, 48% were women, and less than 1% were non-binary or self-described their gender identity, and 18% had more than 4 years of higher education. In terms of ethno-racial identity, and now we're getting into some of our initial findings, we found that 66% of wildlife viewers in Texas identified only as white. And we provided a long list of these ethno-racial identities based on census options, and they were able to select more than one option to reflect their identity. And so we had in total 34% who selected an option other than white or white in addition to that. And we define that group as BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And getting beyond that, 73% of people identified as white, 19% is Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, 9% Black, 5% Indigenous, 3% Asian, and 1% other. In terms of household income, over half of respondents reported a total household income of $49,999 or less, while 12% reported a total household income of $100,000 or more. In terms of residential location, the majority of respondents, or 66%, indicated that they lived in an urban area or small city. And it's important to note that this is based on self-reported residential location and not on zip code. So there may be some differences in the terms of a government definition of their residential location and their own definition of what their residential location was. But in addition to that, we also had a pretty even spread with small town and rural areas. And so now we're going to see our first graph here. You can see the stripes on the black to indicate this is the statewide sample, the green being our consumptive viewers who hunt or fish, and purple being the non-consumptive viewers who don't hunt or fish. And I also just want to point out here in a lot of the corners of our slides, this is where we see our statistical significance. So this shows a chi-square test. There was a statistically significant difference between consumptive and non-consumptive viewers, with more non-consumptive viewers residing in that urban area. So in terms of forms of wildlife viewing, which is what I mentioned earlier with the screening question, the most popular form of wildlife viewing in Texas was visiting parks and natural areas to view wildlife, closely followed by photographing wildlife. And so this is another graph. We can see that statistically significantly more consumptive viewers participated in visiting parks and natural areas, photographing, taking trips and outings, closely observing wildlife, feeding other wildlife besides birds, and maintaining plantings in natural areas. But you can see across all, including the feeding wild birds, of which there wasn't a statistically significant difference, a high percentage of consumptive viewers participated in these activities. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ashley to sort of dive into our 5 key insights from the survey.
Great. Thanks so much, Christy, for sharing the background on our research methods, as well as some basic characteristics of our survey participants. So we're going to organize this next set of slides about the results within the context of some key recommendations that we hope you can take away from this presentation. The first one is that in order to support wildlife viewers in Texas, there really is a desire for the state agency and probably partners as well to provide more wildlife viewing information and access. The second is the need and desire to have more around the home viewing opportunities. And then the third is developing social support networks for wildlife viewers. All of those needs are supported by our data. So I'm going to go through each of those one by one and then show the data that follows behind it. Actually, Christy's going to do some of those as well. And then in addition, we recommend that Texas Park and Wildlife focus on broadening relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt or fish and developing financial contribution opportunities for wildlife viewers, again, supported by the evidence that we'll share with you as we go through that. So let's start on number 1 here, thinking about providing information and access. So we gave our participants a whole long list of ways that they could be supported by their state agency. In the case of Texas, we were talking specifically about your agency. And people could check off whether or not that would be useful to them. And the top responses that were most commonly given by survey respondents related to information. So you can see more information about wildlife in Texas, more information about where to go see wildlife, more information about how to view wildlife, and more information about where and when to view wildlife. And those were selected by anywhere from about half of our respondents to a third of our respondents. Additionally, you can see that access to more places to go wildlife viewing was also of interest to folks. So thinking about how that relates to your state agency, of course, you all have already started to share and have been sharing for a long time wildlife viewing information on your website. Either basic tips for participation, species-specific information, wildlife viewing events, state parks near cities, and Great Texas Wildlife Trail information as well. And so you're already doing this. The question is, how can you either put more information into there for around the home or urban-based viewing, which you'll see that there's support for later on in the presentation, or also make this more prominent on your entire website so it's easier for someone who's involved and interested in viewing to find, or think about ways to push it out to viewing audiences, put it on specific Facebook pages, or make it available in Google searches by various search terms that you might use. So as an example of making it really prominent on your website, here's Virginia DWR's website, and you can see that the wildlife viewing tab is one of the main tabs, or viewing, I should say, is one of the main tabs on the entire website. So it could be something for you all to consider as well in Texas. Now, if you're thinking about working with wildlife viewers and supporting wildlife viewers, and why it is that we might have heard so much interest in information, you can see that the majority of our respondents self-classified as beginner or novice. More than half of the viewers did. And then closely behind that, also that intermediate level. Very few of the viewers who took the survey self-classified as advanced or expert. Now, this might be different than what you're used to interacting with at your state agency. The folks who come to your birding festivals or the folks who participate in your events may be more of those advanced or expert birders. Likewise, if you're interacting with birding clubs, you may also be interacting with those who are more experienced. But if you look across that broader set of respondents who reflect the broader public in Texas, you can see that wildlife viewing is really more of a beginner or novice connection for most of these viewers. The other thing that I wanted to point out is if we look at people who are those hunters and anglers who also view, that you can see in green, or the consumptive viewers as we've termed them, they tend to be a bit more skilled as they self-assess than the folks who are non-consumptive viewers or viewers who only view. So we might think of the people who hunt and angle and also view as people who are just overall probably more involved in wildlife-related recreation and have even more experience with it. So if you are thinking about ways of getting out that information that you already have available or that you may continue to enhance, the top way that people said they were interested in hearing from your agency was through your website, followed by printed materials and email updates. So sort of those traditional ways, or at least traditional in the past couple of decades, for reaching out to people to share information. I will say that in our report, we have a whole list of a variety of different mechanisms, as well as drilling into types of social media. And you'll see that there are lower percentages of those, but it would be possible to continue to do analysis on that and look at different sociodemographics and how they relate to different types of ways that they could be reached with information. But I think this also does emphasize the need for having that information for viewers really available through your website, because it is of interest as a resource and a place that people can go. So this question of improving access. You all have the Great Texas Wildlife Trails. Your state is known as one of the founders of having a wildlife trail program. So you do have a lot of opportunities for people to view wildlife. So the question is there a lack of awareness that these opportunities are available, or is there a lack of access to them, or are they in locations that are harder for people to access? And we don't have the answer to that based upon what we asked in our survey. But I think it is something certainly to consider, is how accessible are these places? Are they near urban areas, as you saw from Christy's presentation earlier about the sociodemographics of people? The majority of viewers live in those urban centers. So do you have a lot of sites that are easy for people to get to from there? Are there public transportation options for people to get there if they're not right next to the easily accessible urban center? Additionally, it's important to think about half of your viewers said that they participate in viewing on state managed lands. So those are lands, whether it be specific to wildlife viewing, or you're an agency that has that parks component in it, are opportunities to think about additional infrastructure and outreach on the value of wildlife viewing, because those are places where you can easily make those sorts of changes. So what are the top viewers that people said they faced in wildlife viewing? Distance to viewing locations. So that brings back some of those things I was mentioning before about making sure that those viewing areas and access to viewing is close to home for people. Lack of free time and financial costs, which are probably all tied together with the distance component too, as that can also be more challenging if you don't have a lot of time to get out viewing, or you don't have the financial means to do so. It also ties in with what we saw in terms of around the home viewing, which Christy's going to talk about now.
Yes, so our second recommendation was that Texas Parks and Wildlife Department should promote around the home viewing opportunities. And this really is a place where you can connect with more wildlife viewers if you develop more means serve those who view around the home. And this is really where the majority of participants are viewing wildlife. So if we take a look at this graph on the locations where people in Texas view wildlife, 71% of people are participating at their own home and property. And this was followed at 53% of people participating at locally managed areas, so county parks and trails. And then, as we mentioned earlier, over half are participating at state managed lands like state parks. And so you can see, except for that own home and property, for basically everything except tribal lands, in which there was a really small percentage of people participating there, more consumptive viewers were participating in all of these locations. So around the home viewing is really where you can connect with those non-consumptive viewers. And one place that we identify as really an opportunity for growth in wildlife viewing around the home is that maintaining plantings in natural areas. And I don't know if you noticed earlier when I discussed the forms of wildlife viewing, that was the least popular form of wildlife viewing. And so that may be an area where the state agency can put resources to frame wildlife viewing around the home as an opportunity to plant native vegetation and sort of frame it as feeding wild birds or feeding other wildlife. Besides providing bird seed, you're then planting native vegetation that provides food for animals. And perhaps the previous Texas Wildscapes program could be revisited to update online and printed resources, even if that certification program isn't feasible. And sort of we want to move beyond those large private land stakeholder programs like Pastures for Wildlife for upland birds and focus on that really small around the home viewing area. And so I think we mentioned before, those conservation behaviors are really important in connecting with wildlife viewers. And that's another area in which people could participate in wildlife viewing and conservation around the home in support of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. So we answered these questions on conservation behavior separately. One question we just asked, how likely are you to participate in these forms of conservation, such as cleaning up trash and litter, purchasing products that benefit wildlife, and civic engagement related to wildlife conservation. We also asked the same set of questions, and we asked them, how likely are you to participate in this conservation behavior with or in support of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department? And we found that people's likelihoods were really similar in terms of their conservation behaviors independently and with the state agency, although there were two sort of key differences. And this was that people were more likely to participate in cleaning up trash and litter on their own, and people were more likely to participate in donating money to support wildlife conservation in support of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And so the top three forms of conservation behavior, regardless of the independent or with or in support of Texas Parks, was 76% of people were moderately, very, or extremely likely to engage with the state agency. 63% were likely to purchase products that benefit wildlife, and 59% were likely to participate in civic engagement related to wildlife conservation.
It looks like Christy may have frozen, so I will carry on. I couldn't tell if it was her computer or mine. So Christy, feel free to jump right back in when you are available. Oh, it looks like she got kicked offline, so she'll be back on in a second. So the third recommendation relates to developing social support networks for wildlife viewing. And oh, there's Christy. Christy, I only got to say like one sentence, so you can carry on now.
I'll take back over. I don't know what's happening. My internet never does this, but to everyone who doesn't know, I live pretty deep in the country, so sometimes we don't really have real Wi-Fi. But our next recommendation is that the state agency should develop social support networks for wildlife viewers, particularly those in underserved or historically marginalized groups, such as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And so one of the things that we looked at was social support, or the extent of encouragement that wildlife viewers feel in terms of their participation. And we found that friends and family were the most important forms of encouragement to their participation in wildlife viewing. And really, one area that we also identify as an opportunity for growth is the role of mentors in wildlife viewing, which was the least important form of encouragement to wildlife viewers. And we sort of see that as an important area in which Texas Parks and Wildlife could really foster this role. So as we mentioned earlier, 34% of wildlife viewers in Texas identified as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And we want to highlight this don't loop. Although this was a pretty high proportion in comparison to other states of BIPOC individuals, it's important to highlight the importance of the don't loop, which is that if you don't meet others who are engaged in a particular activity like birding or wildlife viewing, the odds are you will not take interest in that activity yourself. And if you don't know others who already participate in the activity, you're not going to start. So really, this is an area that Texas Parks should focus on, developing social support networks. And next we have this case study from South Carolina DNR and their BIPOC community engagement. In 2015, they began community engagement with their large Hispanic community, and they hired a Hispanic outreach coordinator, developing bilingual resources and developing specific outreach strategies. And this program was so popular and successful that in 2021, the initial phases of this strategy were then expanded to reach a Black population. And for more information on this case study, we highlight this and a number of others in our national and regional report. Another group in which social support networks are really important are those with accessibility challenges. And we chose this as a focus in this survey. We provided a definition of accessibility challenges to survey respondents that was developed by Birdability, a nonprofit organization that works with people with disabilities who bird. And their definition is the difficulty someone experiences in interacting with or while using the physical or social environment while trying to engage in a meaningful activity, such as wildlife viewing. This may be a result of a mobility challenge, blindness or low vision, intellectual or developmental disabilities, including autism, mental illness, being deaf or hard of hearing, or other health concerns. And we chose this as a focus because a large percentage of Americans experience disability. And then we found in Texas, 36% of wildlife viewers experienced somewhat, quite a bit, or a great deal of accessibility challenges when wildlife viewing. So this is a really important area in which people need to be provided support. And one group, Birdability, that I mentioned just now, provides this crowdsourced map of areas where wildlife viewing and birding is available and explains the accessibility features. So people can go on this map and look in advance to know what the features are and whether or not they can or would enjoy wildlife viewing and birding there. So you can see on the map currently, the sites that have been described now are really centered around those urban areas. So I think it's a really important focus to sort of develop the description of sites beyond Dallas and Houston and Austin. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ashley to discuss the relevance to those non-consumptive viewers.
All right, thanks, Christy. So going back to the consumptive, or those who hunt or fish, and we saw it was mostly fish, and also view, and the non-consumptive viewers, I'm going to talk a little bit about these two groups. So they have different perceptions of and experiences with Texas Park and Wildlife Division. For non-consumptive viewers, they're really across the board. You'll see there's evidence that there's a need to increase familiarity with the agency, as well as even more connections and support of those individuals. So first, I want to show you the results related to familiarity. So we asked people a really broad question: how familiar are you with Texas Park and Wildlife Division? And you can see that the amount of people who are in those darker colors, which represent higher levels of familiarity, is much higher for that consumptive viewer group. About 44% of people saying they're very familiar or extremely familiar with the agency, whereas it's only 24% of people who are part of the non-consumptive viewers. Again, not surprising, because those who hunt and fish are interacting with the state agency for licenses, potentially seeing law enforcement out there, participating in programs that are available for them through the agency. But there's certainly opportunities for the agency to think about broadening their relevancy and their interactions and even awareness amongst those people who only participate in wildlife viewing and don't have involvement in hunting and fishing. We also looked at recognition of the logo for the state agency, and again found a similar pattern. 90% of consumptive viewers saying that they have seen this logo, and 77% of non-consumptive viewers. Overall, 84% of people. So certainly there is recognition of your logo, but that doesn't necessarily translate to a lot of familiarity with your agency, but certainly the pattern still holds there about who or which group has more familiarity and also more recognition. So then what about their interactions with the programs that your agency offers? So we listed out a whole array of programs and touch points that might exist for wildlife viewers with the state agency. And what you can see is that across the board, again, those green bars are much longer than the purple bars. And in fact, if we look to the lowest part here, 45% of non-consumptive viewers said that they've had no participation in programs or services in the last 5 years that Texas Parks and Wildlife Division offers. And so again, this is wildlife viewers broadly in the state that we're talking about, not just the general public. And if they do have involvement with the state agency, it's a similar pattern to what you see that are the most popular ways of the consumptive viewers: through your lands, through your information about wildlife, through your nature centers and visitor centers, and through information about wildlife viewing opportunities. And then we've also looked at how what are the ways in which wildlife viewers have contributed to the agency as another way they might connect with the agency. Again, seeing the same sort of patterns here. We've split this up into two different types of contributions. One, the non-voluntary contribution, the contribution that you might need to make in order to be legally allowed to do something or to actually get access to it. And the fishing license was most common there amongst the consumptive viewers. Of course, we showed you that that group of people was primarily people who are involved in fishing recently. And then followed by your various parks passes, lands passes, permits, entrance fees, and then by a hunting license. And then fees for your programs, a much smaller percentage, and then a required habitat or conservation stamp followed behind that. And then if I show you the voluntary opportunities over here, one thing I want to point out first is just take a look at the difference of the length of all of these bars. Here we had things that were up at the 80% response, and here the highest percentage we get is closer to 20%. So these are voluntary mechanisms that exist for people to support your agency, products that they can purchase from your agency, direct donations of money to your agency, or donations of land through a conservation easement. And again, we see the consumptive group, though, is at a higher percentage than the non-consumptive group, but across the board, these are less common. So I've been pointing out lots of differences between the consumptive and non-consumptive group. I want to emphasize something that's similar amongst them. A place of common ground is that about a quarter of all of the viewers, whether they be consumptive or non-consumptive viewers, feel that the level of prioritization of programs and services for wildlife viewing is too low or far too low. And a lot of them, I will say, also felt like it was adequate. Very few of them felt like it was too much. And so I think that this points out that regardless of whether we're talking about the new audience that you could be broadening your relevance to, or that current group of folks that you already have a strong connection to, there is a belief that you could do more to prioritize viewing amongst a lot of them. And very few of them feel like it's too much that you're doing at this time. So could certainly be a way to please or satisfy a lot of your constituents if you are able to expand into these areas. Okay, so let's talk about financial contributions and carry on a bit more from those initial pieces that I showed you. So in addition to asking people what they've done in the past in terms of voluntary and non-voluntary contributions, we also asked them about what sort of interest do they have in the future in engaging in opportunities to contribute financially to the agency. And about 68% of respondents said that they were moderately, very, or extremely likely to purchase a lands pass. So that was the most common non-voluntary way that people said they would be interested in contributing, followed by a fishing license and followed by fees for a program and event. And I wanted to point the fishing license out in particular, because I know that there's been interest in your state and many other states to think about how can viewing also provide a tie-in to other licensing mechanisms that you have. And so certainly I think that this shows that there is potential interest amongst those wildlife viewers, even those who haven't been participating in hunting and viewing or hunting and angling, to purchase those licenses and potentially get involved in fishing. And then if we looked at the voluntary contributions, the tangible products were most popular for things that people would be likely to purchase in the future, followed by a conservation lottery ticket, and then finally by direct donations. And again, all of these percentages are much higher than what is currently being done in terms of contributions to the state agency. So they point out that there is a potential for you all to make those connections and draw in more financial contributors. I do also want to point out, though, in past work that we've completed, as well as we see the same pattern in this data set, the level of familiarity someone has with your agency is closely tied to how much they contribute or whether they contribute to the agency and are interested in contributing to the agency in the future. So thinking about ways that you can increase people's familiarity with you, provide services to them, is a really important way to lead down the path of having people contribute to your agency. So a way that another state agency has thought about this is through a membership type opportunity, sort of like what a nonprofit would do. So the Virginia DWR created the Restore the Wild program that probably some of you have heard about. And they were trying to rethink the current funding model. They hadn't had a lot of luck with using their state lands pass, because in their case, all they have is the wildlife management areas that are part of the State Fish and Wildlife Agency. And so they wanted to have a wildlife viewer specific membership opportunity that could also provide access to the lands. And they wanted to be able to increase their connection with viewers through this mechanism that they pointed out was directly tied to their non-hunting and angling folks. And they've been using those funds specifically for species conservation and habitat conservation that benefits viewers as well. And this has been really important for getting viewer contributions, because they've been able to say, this is what we're using the money for. It's not just going into a general fund, and that could potentially support other types of programs that aren't of interest to you. And we did find that across the board, when we asked participants to this survey as well, would you be interested in giving more money if it went to ... for many different opportunities that we gave people of conservation, viewing opportunities, those did encourage people, or they said it would encourage them to give more funds to the agency. So I think being able to explicitly state how funding can go back to things that are of interest to people is really useful, as opposed to them just thinking it goes to a general fund. So in Virginia, they have different levels of contributions that people can offer, and different benefits that go along with those. And so you can see that all of them provide opportunities for access, and then also offering the addition of things like their magazine or getting a field notebook or potentially being able to go on a wildlife management area tour. So something like this might be of interest to your agency to think about, or other creative ways that you can think about specifically offering opportunities with a very clear outcome from them that might be of interest to wildlife viewers. So as I wrap up, I wanted to talk a bit about some next steps and things that you might want to think about with this data. So one is there's lots of opportunities to dig into this more. As Christy pointed out, we do have the data set openly available to you. We are additionally planning on doing some more analysis ourselves on a few items too. So using the national data set, we plan to be looking more at rural and urban viewers and comparing the differences between them. We know a lot of state agencies are interested in having more connections with folks who live in urban areas. So assuming that funding comes through for a multi-state phase 2 grant, which we've heard from AFWA, we've already been recommended to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We will be digging into that more next year. Additionally, there's opportunities to look at income level differences, level of specialization or how skilled someone is, age differences. As I mentioned previously on the communications front, there's likely differences there. And then Emily's currently working on analysis as part of her thesis research on accessibility challenges and people who experience them and what are their specific needs and interests for support from the agency. So stay tuned for that next year as well. As I mentioned, we have an application in for a multi-state grant that not only would allow us to do some of those additional analyses, others can do as well, but also distribute our results even further at workshops, conferences, and meetings. We recognize it's really important that people from all different parts of state agencies, as well as other organizations, have the opportunity to see these findings and think about how it might relate to their work. We also are going to be supporting a community of practice where any state agency that's interested in undertaking a project that comes from the results either in their state or nationally could receive support and guidance from us as well as their peers from other state agencies. And we'll work together over the course of next year, supporting each other in implementing those projects. So hopefully Texas will be engaged in that as well. And then we'll also be developing a website with various resources that exist for state agencies to try to implement these types of results in their states, and examples, including those case studies that Christy mentioned are in the national report, but also those that would come from the community of practice next year. Another opportunity that you might be interested in taking advantage of is the Pathways Conference. The Pathways Conferences have tended to be related to human dimensions research. This one is in partnership with Colorado State University, Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and then also Virginia Tech. And we're really trying to make it useful and worthwhile to those who are not necessarily the human dimension specialists in the agency, but also those who work with the public and work with groups like wildlife viewers, who may be a group that is not one that the agencies have reached out to as much in the past, especially given that we know that there's a rise in mutualist values in states and across the country. And those values that people hold related to how they think about wildlife are very much in line with viewing and can lead to unique interactions and challenges for management. So we're going to do a session on this project there. Additionally, those in the community of practice are going to have a one-day work session there. And we have some funding available for those in the community of practice to join us. And there's also grants, travel grants available for state agency staff. So check that out if it's of interest to you to be thinking more about these topics with practitioners and researchers from across the country and beyond. So in closing, I hope that you'll check out the report. I hope you got some useful insights from us here during the presentation, but as I said, there's a lot more in there. And now that you've seen the presentation, it might be a useful time to take another look at the executive summary and see what else pops out at you. And as I wrap up here, I'd like to again thank Christy and Shelley for collaborating on this presentation, as well as Emily, who's been putting things in the chat pod for you. Christy, Shelley, and I are all available via email. If you want to reach out to us, talk about any of these topics more. And then we also have plenty of time here for questions today. And lastly, I'll bring this up again at the very end, but wanted to make sure it's in the chat pod and QR code here now too. As you wrap up being on the line here today, we'd really appreciate hearing from you about what you thought about this presentation. We're doing them for a bunch of different states. We're less than halfway through. So any feedback on how to improve the presentation, or if you liked it, you could let us know, that would be great too. Then we're also interested in how are you thinking about using these results? And so there's an opportunity for you to put in your thoughts on how you might use them. And that will really help us in the next phase of the project as we think about how to support states in using these results as well. So with that, I'll turn things over to Shelley. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ashley and Christy and Emily. I hope that everyone is really excited about this information. I made some notes while the presentation was going on, and as I've reviewed the report as well. And I know it's a big report, but there's a lot of good meat in it. So I highly encourage you to take some time, read the executive summary, read the conclusions, read the recommendations, and then start filling in the blanks as you have time on all the different pieces of data throughout, because there really are some great nuggets in there that I think could inspire projects. And so while you're thinking of questions you might have, I wanted to share some of my nuggets. Anytime anyone's asked me about the survey, the things I kind of ravel off as things that I'm thinking about and looking forward with are, one, I like that our study had more BIPOC community represented in it than some other states. The Latino community, Hispanic community was very represented, as was the Black community. And that was significant. I think that it's less than 3/4 just white, which is great in terms of trying to find data on who we're reaching. I also was interested in the fact that 1/3 of the viewers in Texas had accessibility challenges. I know our ADA group has reached out to me. I know that State Parks has presented some on birdability and starting to try to get state parks into the birdability map. I think that's still a direction we should be going. And if capacity builds up with the wildlife trails, I would love to help with that. Because I see it as a real need, helping people get in the outdoors, regardless of what kind of barriers they may be experiencing, trying to eliminate as many as possible, make it easier. The thing that I always talk about is litter cleanups being so important to people. And I don't know if it's people liking a tangible thing they can look at the end of the day and say, I did that, I helped make the world a better place, or what it is. But how many bird walks or canoe or kayak trips or even bio blitzes could be incorporated with a litter cleanup component might be something interesting, and get different users to take part, or get a different audience that we can talk to about citizen science. Because citizen science wasn't as popular, but we know it's popular with the hardcore naturalists and wildlife viewers. So every beginner I've shown iNaturalist to, though, really loves it. So how do we share that with more people? And lastly, always thinking about money, how, the fact that we have wildlife trails, Ashley mentioned, people don't seem to know about them. And that has been my experience too. We've never had a marketing budget for it. So is there a possibility of a storefront? Is there a possibility of selling merchandise? Is there a possibility of having a membership program? I mean, I've run some numbers and talked to legal to see if this is something that we could do at Texas, and signs are pointing to yes in a lot of these scenarios. There may be opportunities to partner with our foundation, the nonprofit and other organizations that are on the call, the communities. Y'all might want to have storefronts and things like that, thinking about merchandising and how people like to pay into a system. I think the reason our license plate program has been so successful in Texas has been because we earmark that money for projects. And that speaks to what the survey talked about, is people like to give money when they know what the money is going to. They don't want to think of it going into the black hole of the general fund. They want to know that it's going to support non-game or rivers or wildlife big game, whatever the case may be. They love knowing that their money's going to the right thing for what their interests are. So those are some of my top line. I'm sure I have more, but does anyone have any further questions or thoughts they want to share? No hands.
And we're always happy to hear other ways that people think that this is relevant to the agency as well. So feel free to pipe up with that too, to add to Shelley's impressive list. Shelley, it's great to hear. Shelley's had a bit more time to be able to think about this though. So we're putting the rest of you a bit more on the spot.
Clearly, I'm excited about this. So if any of this excites you, please reach out, because I'd love to partner on some of these things for our agency or with external partners, because at the end of the day, I want to connect as many people to the outdoors as possible. I want people to value nature and through recreation and have more opportunities. So anything we can do to set that in motion, I want to help with. So I look forward to those opportunities too. Oh, and I also thought about printed materials. It surprised me on both the national survey and the Texas survey. That was the #2 way people wish we had materials. And when Texas Parks and Wildlife had to shut our print shop years ago after a legislative session, we kind of phased that out and went to PDFs. And it's something, if Recovering America's Wildlife Act were to pass, if funding coming in for the new Roadrunner plate for nature tourism, these are things I'm thinking about, is what materials do we have already that we could update? And yes, magazines in printed materials as well. It is one of the items on the list as well. I think magazines were, but checklists of birds and beginner guides to birds and butterflies and things like that. I've seen other states do that. I know we have those materials, so it's not a heavy lift to update things that we've done in the past, and maybe starting to do some small runs for special events that have a more novice audience, or something we could be thinking about.
Looks like that comment really resonated with folks, Shelley. I see lots of people saying the interest in bringing back especially materials for educators and for kids. Oh, it looks like Kira.
Kira.
I can't find where to raise my hand, so here it is right here.
Go for it, Kira.
When we were at AREA, Aquatic Resource Education Association, the national conference in South Dakota this last couple weeks, I attended a presentation. I can't remember what state, but I can find it, where they were doing 3D recording about different things. So it wasn't like just watching a viewer. It was more social media stuff, but they had GoPro cameras, and then they had the virtual Oculus things, and people, there's places online where you can go and watch these. So the camera's up behind and it says, have you ever thought about fly fishing? And people are casting and stuff like that. Have we done anything like that where we show different diverse people in places where we want more diverse people?
At Texas Parks and Wildlife, we've done photo shoots with that in mind, but it takes having a shoot list and wanting to try to find that. We have tried to become more organic about it. I know our photographers are more aware of this need and trying to do a better job with that as well. But it's a process in
This
our
is a video, not a shoot.
Oh,
So in other words, you're seeing the stream and you're seeing the fly fisherman cast. They also had some other stuff too, and I just can't think of what it was, but one of our volunteers put on the things he had never experienced virtual reality, but it was pretty remarkable, you know, seeing him twist around in his chair and look at everything that was there. And that might be, you know, seeing a picture of something isn't the same as feeling like you're in it. And there's a lot of interest lately in virtual and being present right there. So it was just a thought. I thought I'd go.
No, it's a great idea. Kiki, I see your camera on. Did you ever?
Yeah, I was struck by the need to really pay attention, a lot of attention to novices. And I think the thing is, our tendency is always to go towards, like we consider the low-hanging fruit, the people who are closest to already doing what we want them to do, or already engaged in some way that you can just kind of pull them in. And that would be the easiest thing. Like when we do recruitment for job fair type things, you focus on college and high school, when really what we ought to be focusing on is the little ones and the novices, the beginners. That to me is striking. It would be a striking different approach, and it would be something you would have to keep attending to, because our tendency always is to go towards the ones that are already closest to what we want.
Yeah, Kiki, I think that's a great point. And certainly the beginner and novice piece is not only the youth, but also, I mean, we were only surveying adults, so lots of beginners and novices there. Now, family programs may be a great way to do that. We didn't necessarily look at, does someone also have kids? Although we did look at whether or not people were involved or had taken advantage of youth programs as well. So, and I hear what you're saying too. It's sometimes easier, right, to reach out to the people who already know about you, to reach out to the people who are already coming to things. And it is something you have to do, is challenge yourself more to think about, how can I find those beginners? How can I make this something that works for the beginner, who may be the person who's experiencing some of the strongest barriers of actually getting to the place or having the time for it.
Yeah.
But those also could be the people that you move from beginner to higher levels of involvement and connection to your agency. So thanks for bringing that to light.
Yeah, I was not thinking about, children through adults. I was thinking that was more like of a parallel, because so I'm the Project Wild coordinator, and it was originally K-12 and emphasis on the upper levels. And then when we decided to go to the younger levels, it was a very intentional, very strategic, very researched approach to reach the younger ones. And in a similar way, that's what I'm just seeing a parallel, that if we were going to turn our attention towards novices, we would need to be equally intentional.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or ideas or things that resonated with you? Did a squid fact.
Oh, there we go. Christy, do you want to speak up and say what you just shared?
Yes, of course. So we did have a question looking at programs and services from Texas for people who had children and youth in their household. And so more than half of respondents reported that they didn't have children in their household, but those who did, 45% had engaged in Texas Parks and Wildlife programs and services like school-based programs, camps, and youth and family events. So it's a pretty high percentage, I'd say.
So there you go. Your Project Wild's probably included in there, Kiki.
Yay.
You're so fast, Christy. I was trying to find the list of all the different communication ways, but I'm not finding it quickly.
Yes, and we did ask about TikTok, as Christy said. So anyone who has an interest in how much interest there is in TikTok, you can also find that in the report.
And I know nationally, Facebook was number 4. So while the internet was 1 and printed materials were 2, and email and e-newsletters was 3, nationally, at least, Facebook was 4. I don't remember if it was for Texas as well.
It was 4th in Texas as well, with 40% of people being interested in Facebook communications.
What I think is interesting about that is I think about where we distribute funds and where we distribute support as an agency. And our web team is quite small but mighty. And our Facebook social media team is basically 1 or 2 people. And yet this is where people are going to get our information. So should we be thinking in terms of additionally the printed materials how do we find support for increasing these teams without taking from another team? Like, I don't like that model of if you put another person there, then you have to take a person from over here. So that thought of how do we increase teams for the ways people are wanting to get information from us? We're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit when we aren't in the space where people are looking for us. And those teams do an amazing job. Don't get me wrong. Our social media team, I think, is top notch. Whitney and her team do a great job. It's just, I would love there to be 50 Whitneys. And they're kind of ours. State parks have their own social media folks, and different programs do too.
And since we're talking a lot about the communications piece here, Christy did take a screenshot of that image. If anyone wants to take a look at it, you can click on it in the chat. And I see we're starting to lose some people here who have to move on to new things and other meetings, Shelley. So maybe I'll just take this as an opportunity to remind people to give us any feedback or tell us how you plan or are considering using what you heard about today. And we also, as we said, encourage you to take a look at the full report and reach out to Christy, Shelley, or me if you want to talk more. So thank you so much. Thank you, Shelley, for hosting us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ashley, Christy, and Emily. Y'all are amazing as always.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.